done like a crafting in real life video in a while, so I thought I would do that because I wanted to put together some watercolor backgrounds basically for a bunch of cards that I'm planning to make in the future. And it would seem like a good opportunity to talk about watercolor, which I like a lot, and here's the various options that you have available. Um, so I have a new product I'm going to try, which is the Hobby Lobby store brand of watercolor paper. Basically, this goes on sale for half of the published price, so like the cost per sheet on this stuff is really pretty good. And I am going to start by, as I normally do, cut it into pieces so it's easier to work with. And there are a lot of options when it comes to watercolors. Here we go. This is just barely the right size, so I'm going to cut this into, let's see, I need to do 5 1/4 by 4 1/2, so I probably want the cutting the longer dimension, so I want to be at 5 1/4. And then I can cut this to 4 1/2. Got a pretty nice card panel, and let me just measure that. That's, I measured the other side. So these are, these are 4 1/2, but this is, oh, these are 5 1/4 by 4 1/2. Looks like a slightly strange aspect ratio for some reason. Anyway, so then we have two that are identically the same size. And really the size you cut these isn't a huge deal. It just sort of depends on what you're going to do with them. So if I grab a card base quick, just to sort of do a little size comparison. Here we go. So here's a standard A2. I feel like this is too tall. Yeah. Like this is, I think 4 1/2 is, yeah, I think 4 1/2 high here might be, well, strange because this is, should be measured to 4 1/2, but let's see what this card measures. Maybe I'm just remembering the dimensions wrong on these guys. This is a 4 1/4, okay, 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. So this is, I want this 4 inches by 5 1/4, not 4 1/2, which, that makes sense. Okay. Anyway, moving on. This now. So with like this size panel, it'll just mat nicely on a card with a pretty easy border. So we just need to cut this down to 4 inches. So it's 4 inches by 5 1/4. We probably have enough room here to do a few. So we'll just measure this to 4 inches. Measure this to 5 1/4, and these should be the same, and they are. Got 3. 3 should be a good number to work with. As you can see, we have quite a bit of paper left over, so we could definitely get another card out of that or do something totally different. But I think 3 should work well here because I'm going to actually tape them to this cutting board. Or cutting mat, I should say. And it's nice because it has grid lines, so it's pretty easy to make sure these guys are straight. And I typically tape down with blue painter's tape. There are other options, including, I thought I had some, oh, it's over on the couch, but, so like low-tack art tape exists, but I don't know. I find that painter's tape works pretty well and generally is a lot less expensive, at least for what I do. And I'm trying to get about the same border. It's a little hard to necessarily know at this point. Your tape border is probably always going to be a little off, so if you're very particular about your borders, you will probably want to just paint them however, and then cut it down using a paper trimmer. The tape makes it pretty easy to make sure that we're more or less square. And the purpose of the tape is to prevent the paper from warping too much, because as we add water to it, it's going to get a bit, it's going to start to buckle a little bit, especially on a cheaper paper that's not glued down in any way. Whoops, so I am going to, I tend to like to do series of these just because the taping portion is a lot easier, and you can vary how you tape this as well. There's no necessarily right or wrong way. It really just depends on what you want the final outcome to be. And I don't know about you, but I've been getting very inspired these days looking at all the cool holiday stuff that's getting released. Have a new brand of card kit to try that I'm very excited about, and that's probably going to happen later this weekend. But I thought we would start out with something that, we all love pattern paper, but it's nice to make your own sometimes, because sometimes you don't have what you need, or you don't really want to have sort of a one-off situation where you don't necessarily want to buy a whole pad of paper just because you're going to do one card. I always feel like sympathy cards are those for me, just because I don't make them very often, which I guess in a sense is a good thing, but, they're just sometimes sort of I don't know, it seems to have like a more sort of lunar palette often, or kind of a sort of more of a, I guess, an antique palette too. I don't do antique a lot, but anyway, so we have these taped down. It's helpful to sort of run your finger around the edge, and we only really want to leave this taped until we're done and there it's fully dry, because if you just sort of leave the blue tape forever, basically it'll be a lot harder to remove it later. I haven't used this paper, but I'll say every other paper I've used isn't really too much of a problem. And then when you talk about watercolors, there's a lot of price range, but I basically grabbed a pretty low entry level watercolor set. This is from Jerry's Artorama Soho line. Here you can kind of see the range of the set. It has these are all metallics, and then these are all neons. So it's got some interesting greenish blues. It's got like a pretty nice true green. The oranges are pretty good. The reds are all pretty muted. Like there's not really a true super red. I guess this is sort of as close as we get, but it's still more of a brick red. So we probably would be looking at sort of yellows and light browns and reds, kind of you can see here sort of these three, sort of this sort of corner of the palette is probably what I'll be using the most. Of course, I may do one of these in Halloween and sort of do more of a neon green, because I think the neon green would look pretty awesome for sort of Halloween stuff. And as we get to holidays, obviously some of these other colors are pretty neat. I'm not sure why I used purple here. I think I must have run out or something, because The purple is not metallic. But on some of these, I don't know if the camera's picking it up, but they have a pretty nice sheen. The one thing I noticed with metallic watercolors when I've used them in the past is basically if you re-wet them, the metallic parts float to the top. So I mean, they don't really cover the way you could with an acrylic. Um, you will want some water for watercolor, obviously. I tend to. This is a pretty well loved brush washer, but I tend to keep sort of an area for the dirty water and then an area for clean water. You pretty much don't want to mix them up because it'll start blending your colors, potentially in ways you don't want. And I really like these filbert style brushes because you can load a lot of water, and for something like this where we're doing kind of an abstract background, that's pretty much fine. But we can do a little test with some of these foam brushes because I think they would probably work pretty well for like more of an abstract technique. So I'm going to get my brush wet and then gonna start working on this first panel here, and I will get the panel wet and then start playing with some color. The other thing you may want is paper towels. Whoops. Or potentially, they make dust-free rags that cost a lot more money, but paper towels are usually more available. Anyway, I tend to like them a lot. If you want to dry your brush off, because sometimes you don't want to, use a full load of water. And what we're pretty much doing here is a wet into wet technique. So I just want to get the majority of the paper wet so that the color is going to move around. Most of the cards I want to do sort of have a focal point that's sort of near the bottom in the center or somewhere near the bottom. So I'm going to focus mostly on getting the top of the paper wet. And you just want it to be shiny. You don't want like a whole pool of water rolling around. So I am going to, I think for this first one, I'll just grab a little red. And you can see how like the red just sort of instantly starts, moving around a lot because of all the water. And you can rinse out. I'm going to grab the sort of the more cadmium sort of yellow and then sort of mix some of that in just to sort of get some, uh, you know, get some nice colors going on. There's not really a right or wrong way to do this. It's just sort of what you feel like that particular day. And then I'll grab a little bit of orange, just sort of add a little orange in here. And because these are inexpensive watercolors, they're all pretty much dye-based. And I think I'm going to change my mind, and I think I'm just going to put water everywhere here, and then just sort of let the color get pulled in. As you can see, there's a lot of the paper is buckling up in the middle, so like the edges tend to get more water. So if you don't want like harsh color like you've got here at the edge, let me just rinse my brush out. What you can do is grab a little piece of paper towel or a big piece or whatever you want to, whatever suits your fancy. And basically you can just put it at the edge here and allow it to just sort of soak up any water that's pooling. You can also do a similar thing like here where there's water on the tape. The goal here is that the tape nicely mats everything, but sometimes that doesn't work. So I really like how this is looking. I do think it would benefit from a little more orange. And I'm going to use the deeper orange. I started out with, actually you probably can't see, but I started out with this first orange, so I'm going to try this one. And this is the red I was using. And because a lot of the red has the red has sort of dissipated a bit. So I'm just going to do some abstract stuff with orange. I may want to add a little wire. Grab a little red. Do a little bit like that. And just like grab sort of a brush load of wire to just sort of allow this to move around a little bit more. Maybe a little more yellow here. I tend to like these things when they're more vibrant, and with this kind of a technique, like you can't inherently control everything, So it's good to appreciate that you can't do that. Um, so adding more water and a bunch more color, we got sort of a more variegated look. You know, we got more of a gradient. And you can, of course, like add water and sort of scrub this off. But like if we want to get rid of that harsher line, we can do that a little bit. But I'm kind of liking this. It's a nice sort of fall color story. So I am going to clean this up a little bit with a paper towel, and I think I'm going to move on to my second panel. Because this technique uses so much water, it takes a while to dry. So it's more a thing you'd have to do ahead of time. You see here we're getting some really neat granulation where the pigment is more sort of, you know, you can see sort of the actual like parts of the pigment. So that's something that's sort of to me a very watercolory technique, and I really like it. So I'm going to warm up a little bit of my neon colors because just by adding a little water to them, and I'm going to play around with our cheaper brush. Um, the You may or may not have paintbrushes already, but these guys are very available at the craft store, so they're always kind of fun to play with. And you know, they definitely work for rewetting. It sort of depends on your technique preferences as to if you like them. So I'm going to grab a little green, the like super vibrant green. This one I'm thinking I'm going to be more of a green yellow kind of, I don't know, more of a Halloweeny kind of thing. And this like this dye base, this green is very dye based, so it's pretty vibrant. Um, as you can see, it's less easy to get color on the the foam brush, and the foam brush doesn't give you quite the um, ability to put it wherever you want. Oh, here we go. So as sort of the wire comes in and out of the foam brush by like daubing, this is working a lot better. So I really like this as sort of a spooky green. You know, wash this out a little bit because it's foam. It hangs onto wire, but you know it'll be great. And I'm going to really kind of get into my neon yellow because I think that would be a good look here. Yeah, like to me this is very like spell and witchy and all that. So this background I think I'm pretty good with. I do want to get some of the excess water off. I would say that I think the brush design for watercolor works better, but you know, it's also about what you have around, you know. And it's easy to get a little overwhelmed with all the art supplies one could buy. I know. It, I know I have that happen quite frequently. And it's sort of like, well, you know, you probably don't need all those things. You just sort of need the things that are key to your success. Um, One issue with less expensive watercolors like these is really that you're not going to be able to remove them from the paper the way you would with a more of a pigment-based watercolor. Um, because the dyes basically dye the paper. Also, the less expensive watercolor papers are all pretty much made from wood, so that will also kind of impact things. Generally, these colors, you can see this drying here a bit, so like you can see that the colors are going to get slightly less vibrant than how they looked initially once they start drying out a bit. I'm going to switch over to back to my other brush. Try and think about what I want to do for this last one. I think I'm going to do fall again, but I think I'm going to do more reds and browns as opposed to sort of the more orangey color palette of the first one. This is probably slightly hard to see, so let me just move this over and then move my paints over here because then it'll be easier. So we're going to go into this red again because it worked pretty well and just sort of dab that all over. And like this is what I love about like wet on wet watercolors, where you just see sort of the water movement. Like, and we could actually just leave it like that. I think I will find a brown. The brown, there's sort of a this brown sort of on the right hand side of the red is more of like a yellow ochre kind of color, so it's more of a warmer mustardy brown. Let me just, you can sort of get a sense of that. I think that would look good with the red. It would make it very neutral. So I'm gonna like go into these sort of side areas a little bit more here. But I do really like some of the color palette patterns of the red, so I think I will mostly leave the red in the center alone and sort of add this more as like an around the edge kind of look. Maybe a little more in there. I wouldn't worry about your colors getting intermixed too much in the palette. It's sort of bound to happen. So if you do watercolor for any length of time, you know you'll get things like a little red in your brown and such things. Most watercolor folks actually just really like that because it, you know, it gives sort of a natural look to everything. So now I'm going to go back, and another thing I like about the tape is that it's really easy to wipe off of. You can, of course, not do this and leave it alone. This does have sort of the impact of taking some of the color off the extreme edge. So if you like having more of a harsh line there, this might not be the best technique, but, you know, it works out well for me. And, you know, this was basically 5 minutes after we set up, and we have some pretty cool looking card bases already. So the genius of like taping to like a freestanding mat like this is now you can just move this out of the way if you want to do more. And I want to show you a couple other tools that are kind of neat when you're working with this sort of thing. So I will just pick this whole thing up and move it basically. And now we have working area again, and that's always nice. Put this on the ground temporarily. So that's one option. The other option that comes up a lot with watercolors is you can get a watercolor block, which is kind of a confusing thing if you never run into them. Basically, it's a pad, and rather than just having glue on one side, it has glue on 2 to 4. These are these fluid blocks, which are also 100% pulp, that is to say trees, so they're relatively inexpensive when it comes to the world of watercolor paper. They're glued on 2 sides, and then they're not glued on the other 2. So to get one of these sheets off once it's dry, you'd basically take a palette knife or a butter knife or your favorite skinny, thin, non-sharp item. You know, something like this would work just fine too. I mean, this is a weeding tool, but you know, or I should say this is a part of the Cricut tool set. But yeah, so all those kind of things will help you get it off the block. And the nice thing is you don't really have to worry about taping it because it's already glued. So this one I'm going to treat more like I was actually doing a painting. So I'm going to start out basically to give things a place to live. So I'm going to start out and get the top of this wet to maybe halfway or 2/3, pretty much to here. Because what I want is, like, I want this area to be available to be the ground. So I just want to kind of work through the sky. So I am going to find a blue that I like. This palette actually has a couple really good ones. I think this blue is this is a more purplier blue. Need a little more water. Get this a little bit wet. And with these pan watercolors, you just sort of let them dry when you're done. But yeah, now you can kind of see what this blue actually looks like. So I'm going to put a good bit of blue at the top here. and then just sort of like let it go down a little bit. This will naturally move around. And I mean, this is sort of a fall, so this blue looks a little too blue. I mean, this looks a little warm. I don't know if this... This is sort of a purpley color. This is a darker blue, so this is a more dark purplier blue. So I'm going to take a little bit of that and put it at the top. And then also, like, it's strange because it looks like you're just sort of dabbing, but the color will move out a little bit. So, I mean, I think this is a more fall-like sky. And if we sort of assume this is an area where we're going to have something live, we can basically use this same brush and find a darkish green, which would be, this one's probably this one in here. This is probably a more grayish green. And all I really want to do is just take the edge of my brush rather than taking like the top. I'm just going to sort of tap at the bottom here and make grass. And because there's no water here, like, the color is going to stay where I put it. And I'm just going to tap, 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 tap. And then I can, maybe I will go into this more vibrant green a little bit. Just dry off my brush a little bit. And then just sort of tap, 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 tap with that a little more. And basically we now have like a sky and we have a ground for something to happen on. Actually, now that I'm thinking about it, a little bit of brown would be nice because sort of warmer brown, which I'll grab wet here and warm up. Warmer brown, I think. This doesn't really have to be. And you can already see sort of some spattering here, and you can, like, especially with the drier bits, like, you can see how when watercolor dries, you're going to have a much more harsher edge sort of around the outside than in the middle. I'm just going to go in with some wire. There's some areas like here that I'm not quite loving the lack of color entirely. I like how this is working in the middle, but I'm just going to go in and dab with wire and then let the color sort of do its own thing. And then I am going to come down a little on the side. I pretty much don't want to directly tap into my other color, or the brown is going to kind of start moving around more than I would like it to. But I'm pretty much just leaving an area in here for, you know, something to happen. And it's not clear what that something is to me yet, but, you know, I'm going to use this for some kind of card or other. And I really like how this sky is coming off with sort of this darker area towards the top. So I think I will remember which blue I was in, which is always kind of slightly difficult when you're dealing with a big palette. But I like the darkness here, so I think I'm going to add a little more darkness around the top and around this side, and it should just sort of blend in. And I like just doing sort of this tapping motion and then just sort of letting things work on their own. So that's more of a sort of basic background, you know, so you can get sort of a better idea of, like, you know, if you had a house or other kinds of die cuts or ephemera or whatever, like, they would go really well there. The other larger backgrounds are just sort of abstract, so you can do whatever you want with them. And, well, like, I kind of intended to use them as whole backgrounds. There's no real need to do that. Whoops, animals coming through, if you saw him. The other neat things about these And he's destroying my camera. Congratulations, my boy. Let me re-angle the camera a little bit. The joys of working with animals. So this is basically the size of two. One thing I didn't show you is the sort of this edge on here. You can use that to change the angle of the pad a bit. So here you see this is sort of tilted towards me. So what this is gonna do is make whatever color you put on top tend to bleed down a lot more quickly. So I am going to get this whole thing wet, and we're going to do some more fun abstract stuff. I'm feeling very Halloween today, so I think I'm going to try and play in some purple. So we've got the whole surface wet. We're going to want to work, and generally I try and work relatively quickly. Let's see, if I look at my master one, I'm going to say purple is, this will be purple all the way here, but it is always worth testing. Yeah, that's purple. Okay, so we have a purple and we have a green, so I'm just going to dab purple all over this and be, not very, specific about it. What I really want to show you is sort of how, this should pull the color towards me. You can kind of see that in the patterns that are emerging towards the top. You can see how that color is sort of going down. So this is going to look kind of kind of like a gradient as well, but I just would like to put some more color in that corner. And as you see, you can actually, if you load up your brush with a color, you can sort of splatter paint with this too. You can do other techniques other than the one I'm doing. And I don't know, I think too, it can be a nice time. You can put on some music that you're interested in, and just sort of, you can just use this as a very sort of abstract way to, I don't know, unwind after the day and such. And I think I'm really liking this purple as sort of a Halloween idea, since the other one I did was very much green. So I'm just going to continue just loading up with a lot of purple and seeing, essentially when this feels right to me, which is kind of difficult to say, but with these abstracts, I really like sort of contrasting areas of a lot of color along with areas with not a lot. And because everything's wet, I'm not really able to control where the pigment goes, so it's just sort of very, if I see an area that I'd like more, I just kind of go and push it in. Until it sort of, at some point, will feel like it's probably done. I think I would like to mix in a little of that. There's a dark purpley blue. Yeah, this sort of grayish blue I think would look really neat with it as well. So I'm going to mix a little bit of it in, but I still kind of want this to be primarily purple. And it doesn't actually need to be here if I decide I just want to do a little swoop-dee or whatnot. The thing to appreciate with wet on wet is you don't have 100% control on this, so and as it dries too, there's a tendency for the pigment to move around, much more so than if you're doing more of a dry treatment. I like this, but I think I want to use just a touch more purple. I sort of want to overlay this blue with purple. I don't know, it's kind of I'm kind of liking this particular look. Sometimes you can do swoop-dees. You can actually, since it's wet, the pigment can move around too, so you can actually scrub if there's an area you want to kind of blend more or blend less. I think this is really nice, actually. I like this as a look. Obviously, this is too large to use as one background, but you can certainly cut it up into more than one background, or you can, cut it through as strips, either in any direction you want. And I guess the other thing that's worth mentioning is like use very little watercolor. So like even your sort of basic set of watercolors is going to last you for a very long time. I tend to just put my swatch card back in and close it, and then I'm good to go. Uh, these Soho ones I think are pretty good. There are a bunch of other options. Prang is probably the best children's watercolor if you really want to start super low budget, because most of their sets come with sort of your basic colors, and then you often even get a brush. As you can see here, this is dry. This one is pretty dry at this point. I mean, not dry enough to do anything with, but you can kind of see the edges here I was talking about, where it just basically gets a lot more. Oh, here we go. You can see sort of the harsher edges. And here you can see what happens when sort of the green starts blending in. Anyway, I think this is good. This is sort of like, we have a nice stage for something to go there. And we can, of course, do the multimedia thing as well, where we can put whatever we want there, and we can use glitter, and we can use acrylic paint and do other stuff. But I realized I hadn't done watercolor backgrounds in a while, and I think these are just really relaxing and fun to paint. So I hope you like that. And this one's going to dry for a while, and let me just grab this is the original set we did. You see, there's still wet areas here, obviously, but the paper itself has gotten to the point where it's buckling a lot less. This one on the end is really neat. Like this looks very fractal-like to me. This one I think, and the two other gradients work well. They're just more, I don't know, more of tone-on-tone gradients. So, I mean, they're more of a subtle look. So, I mean, I think they are better as like backgrounds, but you wouldn't need to worry about them out competing stuff. The more, ones that look more like this, you kind of can sometimes worry about them out competing other stuff going on. Anyway, thanks much. Hope you enjoyed this. If you enjoy watercolor, let me know. And if you have favorite brands of watercolor, let me know. I own a bunch of different kinds, so if you want more, like a more in-depth look at doing some other things with watercolor, we can certainly do that. Have a good rest of your day.